man, maybe I should just come out and ask you. I've been thinking about, there was this guy, his name is Andrew Walker, professor, and he wrote an article and he said, no, the end of Roe v. Wade is not the beginning of a theocracy. You're not living in a theocracy because Roe v. Wade ended. And I haven't completely read the article yet. I just saw the title of it, and I think him and one other person wrote it, and I'm going to go read it. But I noticed that people really do have a massive problem with a theocracy. And I'm just like, wow, okay. And I was thinking, I wanted to ask the question why people have a problem with the theocracy. And I think it would be really cool to go through all of the real reasons that people have a problem with a theocracy and point out that all of their problems that they have with a theocracy should be all of their problems that they currently have with the system right now.
Yeah, but I think it's because the system they have right now, transforming it into a theocracy directly would be terrifying. Right? I mean,
as if it doesn't have one right now.
Well, it's a theocracy. Like right now we have a terror-based government, right? I mean, we don't have nobody thinks, oh, well, you've seen the response to Roe versus Wade, that we don't have the rule of law. We don't have a legal system that we all are grateful for, that we want people coerced into doing the things we want by force, and that system is a theocracy with a terrifying God at the top. But it's a fight for who's at the top right now. Is it a republic or is it a democracy? Democracy is when Demos is at the top of this system. That's terrifying, right? If Demos is the God and he's at the top of this system, or we're at the top of this system, then whatever is the majority should get to make the laws. And that's the argument that's being made right now. How dare they go against the majority,
Demos.
Against the Demos? They have spit in the face of God, or of the gods, the Demos. And that's a lot of the argument that's going on. What we're just going, but it's because they don't understand. They have a different understanding of what a legal system is, what it's supposed to do, what a court system is, what it's supposed to do. Does it fit into the world? Does it have a place, or is it just a means of directing coercive force, a means of directing power? Is it a will to power, or is it is there an actual metaphysical legal reality that we're trying to reflect into the world with our legal system? It's a different understanding. There are two warring understandings of the universe, of the cosmos at hand. And it's not the right and the left, because a lot of people on the right agree with the people on the left. They think the problem is just we should have the majority and be in power. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess, I am trying to, one of the things I don't think we do well is really try to understand. Okay, first, let me say this. And this probably has to be the most self-serving podcast that exists out there on planet Earth. I really am I kind of am just going this direction. If people want to go with me, that's fine. But there might be some people who are listening to us for the first time. It's like, welcome into the living room. Take your shoes off. There's drinks inside the fridge. Grab some if you want some. There's also some fruit on the table, but we about to chill over here. So this really is me talking with you and trying to figure out stuff, so it doesn't have, everybody's like, there's no music in the beginning. It's like, no, because it's actually unplugged. We're not, there isn't a structure to this in a typical way. So that said, this kind of your first time me welcome to the home. But it really is self-serving. It's all about me. I just want everybody to know that. But I don't think we spend enough time trying to really understand where the other side really is coming from and what they're really saying. And so that's kind of what sent me down this train of thought in one sense, is that um, when people are arguing about a theocracy, they're arguing about this power forced on them. They're arguing about this um, authority that is requiring them to do something. They're arguing about, put it in the fact, well, it's a religious belief that is coming from someone or something, a God that is saying that I must do this. But I don't understand, like, anything that sets down a moral path or a moral foundation is coming from a being or coming from something that is considered to be the highest authority, right? So when we say you shouldn't do this, the question is, and every little kid understands this, why? Right? Every little kid is like, why? Like, they get the question, they understand, who says I can't do that? Why can't I do that? What authority is that coming from? So when I see people arguing against a theocracy, or they're mad about religious people pushing their beliefs on folks, I'm like, um, so who do you want pushing your beliefs on you? Right? Like, what system? Let me know what it is, the system that you want to push your beliefs on somebody. Like, what is that system? Because it's going to happen. Somebody's beliefs are going to get pushed on you. Somebody's moral values are going to be at the forefront. So we're not questioning whether or not we should have a moral value system. We're questioning, where should it come from, right? And so I guess I want to understand, when people are afraid or concerned about a theocracy, what is it that what is it they're concerned about? Because they're not concerned about power and authority. They're concerned about whose.
But they are concerned about authority, right? Because authority is not a real thing in the modern system or in the modern mind. Authority has to do with power and coercion, not with right to rule. Not there's because there's not a belief in hierarchy.
Wait, you got to say that again, because I think that authority is not about power.
Because authority, when we say authority, we immediately think that that's the power to make other people do what they don't want to do, right? That's what authority is. That it's coercive force. But authority, and scripturally speaking, has to do with authority is established first when Adam is given dominion over the world, and so that he can garden it and bring it to its intended end, right? To its telos, right? There's a place that the world is supposed to end up. Authority has to do with who is responsible to bring it to that end, right? Who is the gardener of this particular piece of what the world, and the gardener's job is to make a fruitful space, right? So that's authority, scripturally speaking. And so there's a hierarchy set up, but it's a hierarchy that has to do with dominion. But see, even dominion, we immediately think in terms of domination, right? Dominion is, I can make other people or make something do something it doesn't want to do. But that is an anti-hierarchical understanding of the world. But it has to do with what kind of world we believe we live in, right? So we've talked a little bit about Kant on here, but I think Nietzsche is actually who we're in conversation with when we're right now, right? In this particular discussion. And what you've seen is Nietzsche has won the debate, and now we don't realize that's who we're actually debating, and so we're losing the debate because of that. So I think maybe a quick overview of Nietzsche. You froze on my screen. Are you still good on your side?
No, I'm still good. Go ahead.
Okay. So So Nietzsche was a German classicist, where he taught the classics. He taught Greek literature, ancient literature, drama, that sort of thing. But he lived during that time when the cosmological revolution was happening, and we don't even know that there was one.
I'm looking like, what?
But this was the major shift that has, I think, switched and changed all of our assumptions. And it started in Milton's day. Milton, he interacts with it a little bit. But we tend to, what we say in our history books is they used to believe that the world was flat and it was the center of the universe. But now, but then they discovered that the sun was actually the center of the solar system, and weren't they so silly to think that the Earth was the center? They were just uneducated. The reality is, the folks in the Middle Ages were far more educated than anyone you meet ever in your life. Right? They valued education in a way that we don't at all. And they, so if they were, if somebody that studied literature was also, an amateur, meaning someone who studied because they studied science, they studied astronomy, they studied geometry and math and all of those things, because they believed that all knowledge actually fit together into a unified whole, because they were studying a unified universe that actually fit together. And we don't believe that anymore. That, and the change began to happen. It started in Milton's day. He was aware of it. He mentions it a couple of times in his poetry. He talks about the debates about whether or not the sun or the earth is the center of the solar system. But what he said, and even the fact that we call it now a solar system, right? It's a system that rotates around the sun, is a change. And it wasn't because they didn't know. They understood how geometry works and how space works, and if everything is moving, it's arbitrary to pick what is the center of a moving system. But you have to pick a center in order to make predictions and let the astronomical math work. And they had picked the Earth as the center. And when somebody came along, and people had, before the cosmological revolution, people had come along and said, the math is easier if you put the sun at the center, right? And they knew that that was the case, but they said, but it doesn't make as much theological and philosophical sense. And it's just a difference between hard math and easy math. The math is hard either way, but harder math and easier math. And so even when they knew that you could do the math easier with the sun at the center, they stuck with doing the math about the solar system with the Earth at the center for philosophical and theological reasons. And because the way that they imagined everything was that the further you got towards the center, the less movement there was, which is true geometrically speaking, the mathematically speaking, and the less movement there was, the less heat there was, and because of sin, the darkness of our sin has actually caused us to be further from life, and so in Dante's Inferno, they go down into the center of the earth, and the further they get down, the colder it gets, until they get to the very center where everything is covered in ice and frozen and not moving, because the sin has separated them so far from life that the poetic image that made the most sense was frozen in place, right? So they get to where Satan is in the center of hell, at the depths of hell, and everything is frozen in place. And that is a theological point, not a scientific point that he's making. There's a poetic theological point, not a scientific point.
Hold on, you froze for a second. You said frozen in place, and you said that that's a theological point he's making, not a scientific one.
It's not a scientific point that he's making. He's making a theological point, poetically.
Yeah.
But the math works either way. In terms of astronomically speaking, if everything is in motion, you have to pick a point from which to
calculate that. Yeah.
To calculate everything, and you can pick the sun or the moon. If you pick the moon, the sun or the Earth, if you pick the sun, then the moons have epicycles, rather, and the planets don't have epicycles. If you pick the Earth, the planets and the moons of the planets all have epicycles, and it's just more complex.
Is this going back to what we talked about with the two centers?
Yeah. So the two centers, that has to do with the fact that not all of the rotations around the sun are circles, or that they're all oblong. That things rotate in an oblong way because there are actually two centers, and so that has to do with if you have a solar system with the sun at the center versus putting the Earth at the center, then you get these oblong shapes rather than epicycles, which are rotate. You've got kind of that a flower shaped rotation around the Earth of the planets. But what happened was it wasn't an understanding of the sun being at the center that actually made the difference. What it was putting the sun at the center changed the imaginative understanding of the universe, where so in Dante's Inferno, it's really pretty amazing. He moves down through the 9 levels of hell. He gets to the center. It's completely frozen. And as they climb down Satan's shaggy haunches, in order to get all the way through hell and begin the ascent up the other side, gravity shifts directions because they know that the Earth is round. They know that means that the center is down, and if you pass through the center, you begin going up. Right? They know all of that, and so he climbs through and he begins going up the other side, which is the Purgatorio, and then they begin climbing, or he begins his motions through the heavens, and he gets to the very edge. And the further he gets up and up and up the heavens, the more light there is, the more music there is, the more life there is. Everything is more and more alive the further you get from sin. And he gets to the very edge of everything, the edge of creation, and God draws him through into his presence, and he says, everything immediately is recentered, right? So the very edge where God is recentered and becomes the center of all things. And so it's this imaginative understanding where center is not just merely a physical property. Center has to do with the point through which you integrate everything. What was lost in the cosmological revolution, as they began saying the Earth isn't the center, the sun is actually the center of the solar system, they weren't just saying that. They were also saying, and the rest of the universe is dark, empty, and cold, and meaningless. Because there is no integrating point, because materialism was taking over at the same time. Now, in our history books, we say that the change was from the Earth being the center to the sun being the center. What actually happens is you have this move towards strict materialism, where anything that wasn't material is no longer considered real or important, right? So if it's not material, it's not important. And so Kant begins just by separating the non-material into its own realm. So everything material has to be explained in purely material terms. Nietzsche says, well, that's just nonsense. If everything's material, and we don't have to, everything that's not material
Doesn't
is
exist.
what he says is an invention of man to gain power over others. Right.
Okay, so then take me back. What is it that Kant was saying was not material? What are not material?
God, morals,
Love.
virtues.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have. So he says he says rightly, if there's not a God, then there isn't any moral imperatives. Right.
Except for that one.
You have to have an absolute morality that exists apart from ourselves that we compare to for there to be a morality that makes any difference. The cosmological revolution says, in fact, the world is a monolith of chaos. There are times and places where certain creatures, man, gains enough power over creation to push back the chaos and make room to build something. Eventually, the chaos is going to come back in, but through gaining enough coercive power, we push back the chaos and make it possible to build something. And so morality, in its best usage, is actually just the agreement to get together in order to push back the chaos enough to make room for society, right? So what Nietzsche says is, so he's a strict atheist, and he says we don't have to argue for atheism, right? Because he says Christianity doesn't fit into this cosmos, right? He sees, and he says, because of astronomy, because of the advancements in astronomy, we know that Christianity no longer fits in this cosmos, right? A cosmos that is all chaos, that is basically fundamentally chaotic, empty, cold, dark. Christianity doesn't make any sense in that. You had to have the older understanding of a cosmos that was fully integrated, that completely fit together, that was filled to the brim with hierarchy, beauty, song, glory, light, right? All of that. He said you have to have all of that if Christianity as a system is going to make any sense. Because we know that the world is not that anymore. We don't have to actually argue against God's existence. All we need is a psychological explanation for where he came from. Right? Now, Freud is the one who's famous for developing the psychological the psychological explanation of where God came from, right? That God was a psychological crutch that we had to invent in order to make society, but we don't need him anymore. He was the father in the sky that fulfilled a psychological need. But Nietzsche does the same thing, where he conflates philosophy and psychology. But what he does, it's two main things. So Freud spent a lot of time reading Nietzsche, and he stopped reading him because he said, I'm not going to be able to come up with any of my own ideas to be famous for if I keep reading Nietzsche, because he explained everything already. So, which tells you a lot about Freud. But Nietzsche, he says that the great enemy of mankind is the metaphysic of Christianity, that believes sin and guilt have metaphysical properties. There is no metaphysic, right? So he says there is no great thing that holds reality together outside of just simply the material existence and the material laws. And he's a phenomenal writer. He's a lot of fun. He's very bombastic. In fact, he's sort of like an atheistic Doug Wilson, right? He's like hilarious, bombastic. He doesn't care that much about what other people think about him, and so he just, this will get a great response, that sort of attitude. He's pretty funny, but his whole thing is, if there's no in a cosmos that isn't integrated by any metaphysical principles, but that isn't integrated by any, if there's no integration point for everything, we're just material. We're just stuff bouncing along. And he says, and what we want is power, right? Because that's the only thing that can defend us against the encroaching chaos. This is the old Greek mentality. I mean, he is a classicist, so he's actually getting at what ancient paganism was based on, right? In ancient paganism, the world is dangerous, chaotic, trying to eat and destroy you everywhere. It's encroaching in upon you, and whoever is powerful enough to hold back the chaos is worshipped as the god in the moment. Right. So the Titans held back the chaos, so they were worshipped. But when somebody was able to destroy the Titans, Zeus, and then he and his other beings get to be worshipped as God, because now they're holding back the chaos. Eventually, the emperor is the one that holds back the chaos, so he's worshipped as a god. But the purpose of the gods is to hold back the chaos. But if we live in a simply chaotic universe, then we also are internally simply filled with chaos, right? Whatever we see in the sky, because of the way God created us, we will assume reflects the inside of us. That's all throughout history. If you want to recreate humanity, recreate their understanding of the heavens, recreate their understanding of the universe, and you will recreate the way they see themselves. Because we do live in this we actually do live in a fully integrated universe. And part of the integration is we were created to look up into the sky, see the heavens, and then know that that is a true reflection of the heaven of heavens, and that what is done in heaven is then supposed to be done on earth. And so we take our marching orders from the sky one way or the other. When the cosmological revolution came along, the marching orders shifted, because suddenly it was dark, cold, empty, chaotic, and trying to kill you.
Trying to kill you? Is that what you said? Because you broke up.
Trying to kill you, yeah, because that's what the heavens were doing. And so suddenly it recreates our understanding of the world. It shifts everything. And what is it that we need then? We need to amass power somewhere. And Nietzsche predicts the 20th century. What's going to happen? You're going to begin seeing the amassing of power in governments, and it's going to be bloody and violent. But he just says that's just what we need to do. That's what that's how you hold back the chaos. You amass enough power, and so it's very Machiavellian. When you amass enough power, then you have control over reality. Right? So it really is a fundamentally different view of everything, right? Of existence, than what you have presented in the scriptures, which is that you have a universe that is a fully integrated whole, and the thing that holds it all together is Jesus, who is prophet, priest, and king. So he holds it together in his personhood. He holds it together he holds it together by means of exercising the offices that he holds. He exercises the offices that he holds by establishing offices in the world to reflect him. Right? He gives gifts when he ascends on high, and he gives gifts to men, and then it begins talking about the offices that he establishes on the earth. Right? He establishes offices on the earth as gifts because it's an integrated universe in which authority is a blessing, because authority is the authority that a gardener has, the authority to protect, preserve, and bring to its intended end whatever it is that is established there. Right? It's an authority that makes space for things to become what they're supposed to be, which is not a coercive power. It's there needs to be power, but it's a protective power, right? You protect the innocent from the guilty. And this is one of the things that's crazy is Nietzsche's, if you want to see somebody that has actually delved into the depths of the psychology of mankind and found how sinful we are, Nietzsche is the guy to do it. That's what he, all of the philosophers in his day were saying man is basically good, and they are, and what they want is to be happy, and they'll do whatever they think is going to make them happy. And he's like, you haven't met very many people, have you? Most of the people I know are mean-spirited, and even if they're kind, it's because they're trying to take advantage of somebody somehow, and it makes them feel better than other people. And I mean, he actually understands, psychologically speaking, that mankind is a power-hungry monster. But what he says is, but there's no such thing as sin. So that's what we are, and we may as well just face down the fact and be okay with it and be the best power-hungry monster that we can. And then he tries to pull morality back in through the back door, but obviously it didn't work because Hitler was a big fan of Nietzsche. Did I lose you?
No.
Okay.
But I'm trying to figure out how I can stop this recording, go back and listen to the last 25 minutes. That's what I was trying to figure out.
And this is what I don't think the church understands in all of these things that we're dealing with right now. We're not actually the atheistic understanding of the world has already won. So we're actually in a fight, in an argument. We don't know what argument we're in, right? The argument is really over metaphysics. The argument is really over cosmology. What kind of place did God create? What kind of creature is my neighbor, right? Because the pro-choice arguments make perfect sense in a universe where the will to power is the only thing that holds back the destructive chaos that is trying to get at us all of the time. And because he's fully aware that if what he's saying is true, then some people are going to have to die because of it, right? You're going to have to sacrifice people, right? He's fully aware of that, and he's like, yeah, but he's just like, that's reality. We live in a place full to the brim with rivalry, and the only thing that you can do is sacrifice some of the people along the way. That is the pro-choice argument that we haven't been able to answer, right? When they talk about it as if parents and children are rivals, right?
Right.
You're picking yourself or your children. Which is it going to be? And the Christians say, well, obviously you pick your children, right? The reality is, what we need to be saying is, generations aren't rivals. It's not how it works. And when they become rival, I mean, if you think about ancient writings, the reason we have words like patricide, matricide, and is because kids grew up and killed their parents, right? And those are the stories they tell, because the rivalry between generations is something that in a non-integrated cosmos, the rivalry between generations is inevitable. In an integrated cosmos,
just stop right there. Hold on. Because what you just said, I think most Christians they have children, and they grow up in that world where they expect their kids to be their rivals by default.
Right.
By default, that's what they are expecting. So they have a broken cosmology before they ever get outside of their home.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, think about this, right?
Whoa. That's just, I mean, we're not even talking about baptism. I mean, are we?
I know.
Are we? I mean, we kind of are.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we are.
Yeah, we totally are.
We totally are. So I just went and watched the new the new Jurassic Park movies. So I was a huge Michael Crichton fan back when I was an atheist. Um,
Okay.
and he wrote the original Jurassic Park. Um, I he is a perfect example of the mythology of the fundamentally a non-integrated universe that is violent and chaotic, right? Because
Mm,
you bring back dinosaurs and the assumption is they'll try to kill us. That's just the assumption. Uh,
mm.
the science doesn't tell us that. All we've got are some bones. We uh that we
Wow. You
so
better
we
shut
assume
up.
that if you go back into the ancient world, it's going to be more violent, more chaotic. You go back far enough, right? So I would love to make a movie where they bring back dinosaurs and the dinosaurs are all calm and peaceful and people start trying to turn them into monsters, right? Because they're not naturally monsters, because they're from an earlier time before there was a rivalry between nature and mankind, which we started, right? Nature is not naturally our rival, right? Nature is exactly the kind of place that we should be, that was fully willing to embrace us and raise us and give us everything we needed. We started a rivalry with it because of our sin, right? So the I think, but we wouldn't even ask that question. I mean, the new one opened up and my first thought was, we're in a Nietzschean universe, I see. Because every dinosaur is immediately trying to kill people as soon as it looks around and sees somebody, right? But that's a Machiavellian, a Nietzschean understanding of the cosmos that we have all swallowed. So we assume there's going to be generational conflict, generational rivalry. We honestly, a lot of well-meaning Christian parents think that's what they're trying to solve
Right.
with discipline.
Right.
But that's not what discipline is, scripturally speaking. Discipline is training you how to live well in the garden, right? Discipline is a training
Right.
process. It's not a
I'm
um,
angry at you, therefore
angry.
you get
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not a overcoming of. It's not a will to power game that we're playing, right? Where it's not a one of us is going to have the power here and it's going to be me, right? It's a what kind of world do you live in, right? If you go that direction, you live that kind of way, there's a lot of pain to be found. Let me train you, right, with
Mm.
limited small pain that doesn't take any time to recover from now, so that living that sort of way leads to long, big pain, right? So I'm training you away from the kind of living that leads to long, big pain, so that you can actually enjoy your time together in the garden. But that involves creating a space, creating an atmosphere in the family that reflects reality, the integrated universe that God has made, that's full of fellowship, joy, laughter, food, music, all of the poetry, storytelling, joy, hard work, but the kind of joyful hard work, all of those things. That's what our home should reflect, and the training is part of that, because there are ways to live that disintegrate that kind of atmosphere, that make it so that you can't enjoy the world God made, that are very, very painful, right? And so the idea of training is sharp, small pain, shows you the edges, shows you the directions, the roads that lead to big long-term pain. So you stay off those roads and you come back to the joy-filled space of an integrated universe.
You should never imagine that the atmosphere you breathe has no influence on you.
Right. Yeah.
That's from Abraham Kuyper.
Oh man, that's good.
I was just reading them last night, and everything that you're seeing right now is it's striking me because I'm trying to figure out, so you just basically made the point that the issue over authority is really a cosmological problem.
Right. And this
And
this is why the lordship of Christ often doesn't sound like good news, because we
uh
think we think
I get it. Yeah.
individualistically, right? We think by lordship that means there's a direct connection between me and Jesus where he rules me. And we can see that that's good news because we know that as a lord he's promises to provide and protect, and that the love to a lord looks like obedience, right? So and if we know and understand that the law is a summary of love, like Paul says, that the law is a description of life, like John says, if and Moses says that God lives this way, and he gives us the law, and then we reflect the life of God. We reflect the love that God has for us by living out the law. If we understand those things, then the lordship of Christ sounds like good news. But if we don't believe in an integrated cosmos, then theocracy sounds like a curse, because the ruler is a coercive role. The ruler is a role that he's the one that gets to tell you to do the thing you don't want, right? Rather than, I mean, this is where something like you read Tolkien, and it's so people get so drawn in because they see Gimli with Galadriel. He's happy, willing, wants a queen. He wants somebody like that to have authority over him because he knows that his life will grow and sprout and become better and greater by having a ruler like that, because he gets to bow down to her because he sees that she is his greater. She
Mm.
is the hierarchy is a reflection of reality in that situation.
Oof.
That it's tyranny, um, the rule over equals, the rule of one equal over another equal is tyranny. In that, if the situation is he gets to tell us what to do, um, when we don't want to do it, right? But in a situation where you the beauty of hierarchy in the world is that that Jesus is greater than us. And so we get to bow down to him. We get to glorify him because he is a great leader, because he has so I mean, it's all connected, because this is
Take
where
your time, dude. You got all day. I don't care. I'm so like, just take your time. You don't need to feel rushed at all. Go for it.
in the book of Hebrews, it's just so hard to know which direction to go, because it's
All
like,
of them. Go all of
yeah,
them.
you've in the book of Hebrews, this is the book of, when I was a brand new Christian. I can't remember. I think I read it in, I can't remember if it was Charles Spurgeon or Martin Lloyd-Jones. I was really blessed to be offered access to a number of libraries that were packed full with amazing books when I was a brand new Christian. I can't
Mm.
remember if it was Spurgeon or Martin Lloyd-Jones, but one of them says, pick a book from the Old Testament, a book from the New Testament, and a person from history, and do everything you can to become an amateur expert on. It'll be better for you to dive in really deep in one place than to think you can dive in deep everywhere and accomplish it, because you'll never get deep anywhere.
So wait,
And
a
so
book from the Old
a
Testament?
big book from the Old Testament, a book from the New Testament, and a person from church history, and dive in as deep as you can. And so,
Okay.
so
Which one did you put?
Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, Hebrews in the New Testament, and and then um, at first I was going to do John Calvin, but then I realized everyone did. So I ended up with Maximus the Confessor. So I've tried to get everything I can on Maximus and really dive in. And
okay, so I'm going to do
and
Deuteronomy.
then Augustine of Canterbury I tried, but then there wasn't enough. So, you dig in really deep there. And
I think I'm going to do Deuteronomy, and I think Ephesians, or maybe Romans.
Oh yeah,
Ephesians,
that'd be amazing.
Yeah, Ephesians might be the place for me to stay because I think those two work good for me with the law and then the but
yeah.
And then I have to do John Knox.
Oh, that totally makes sense. I've got the works of John Knox. If you, yeah, I've got a photocopy of it all. I got a photocopy of it from the library.
I just need to go pick it up. I know where to get it. Okay. Anyway, I just wanted to know which ones you did. Now I know which ones I'm going to do.
But the book of Hebrews, it's got so much about. So that's where the cosmological. That's where I first started in realizing that cosmology was so important, because it has a whole bunch of stuff about the cosmos and the reflection of the cosmos in the that Moses got a vision of heaven, came down and built the temple, right? The heaven of heavens. And then he came down and built the temple, or the tabernacle. So the tabernacle was a picture of the heaven of heavens. But then you start studying the tabernacle and you realize the tabernacle also reflects the heavens. So the heavens is a reflection of the heaven of heavens, and then the tabernacle and the temple then, and then the Ezekiel's temple, and then the church, the temple at the end of Revelation, which means that the church then is an integrated reflection of the life of the heaven of heavens, which is what the Lord's Prayer teaches us. Right? So all of it, you realize, oh my gosh, it all fits together. There's an integrated cosmos. And then came across C.S. Lewis, who basically said, historically speaking, the Christians used to believe in an integrated cosmos. And then he gives a description of it. And then you start seeing it everywhere. You're reading Nietzsche and he says, astronomy has changed and that affects everything. And you're like, oh my gosh. So, but in Hebrews, this is where the author of Hebrews says he's both the priest and the sacrifice, right? And his priesthood is after the order of Melchizedek, and we've talked about that, the order of Melchizedek, and the priesthood, the establishment of the priesthood of Melchizedek through the Davidic line, and the rights of the firstborn of David being priestly rights. But what makes him able to be the sacrifice is his office of kingship. Because the office of kingship is representative in the same way that the sacrifice is representative, right? You ordain a king and lay hands on him in order to make him a king, just like you set up a sacrifice by laying hands on the sacrifice, right? That's how you transform an animal from just a sheep to a sacrificial lamb, by laying your hands on it 3 times. Right, the priest lays his hands on it 3 times, and then he becomes your representative, and he dies on your behalf, and then is burned up and can ascend before God. Right, Jesus, because he's the rightful heir of the throne of David, he's the adopted firstborn son of Joseph. Joseph is the rightful heir of the throne of David. When Joseph accepts him as the firstborn, he becomes the rightful heir of the throne of David. His baptism is not just a simple baptism. His baptism is also his anointing as king, right? That's why it's so important that the heavens open up, the throne comes, and the heavens open up, the dove comes down, and the words of God are heard from the heavens. This is my beloved son, right? That's his installation as king. And God himself does the installation, right? The words as the installing as king involve having the spirit, the oil poured on you, you have to be washed, you have to have the oil poured on you, and then you have to have the words spoken over you.
Why haven't I seen that before? Why haven't I seen that? No,
because we don't believe in an integrated universe, right? We don't believe it's all integrated. So Jesus is he's installed as king by God himself, which is why immediately it says the Spirit pushes him into the wilderness in order to fight. So he's now the king. So he goes out and he fights off the 3 temptations that Israel faced in the wilderness, that it failed in, which are also the temptations Adam faced in the garden. Right. So he's installed as king of Israel, and he proves that his kingship of Israel is also an Adamic kingship, right? By facing down the temptations of the wilderness, which were the temptations of Israel in the wilderness, which were also the temptations of Adam in the garden. Once he is king, he now is our representative. Right? So now as he goes around, every meal is a kingly meal. Every meal, I mean, it's also a communion meal because of the priesthood of Melchizedek, but every kingly meal was a priestly meal in all of David's kingship, all of his descendants. So when he gets to the cross, he can die as our representative because he's the rightful heir of the throne of David. So he can be the priest that offers the sacrifice because of his Melchizedekian priesthood, but he can also be the king that is the sacrifice because he's the rightful heir of David and the rightful heir of Adam. He's the representative king, and a good king. A king is a good king because he gives himself for his people. He dies for his people. He gives himself away. It's the definition of a good king in the Bible, and in all literature, really.
Which is what Saul was supposed to go do. He's supposed to go fight. He's supposed to go.
Exactly. Right. And that's how you know David is the good king and Saul is the bad king. They've both been anointed. Yep. David hasn't been installed yet when he faces Goliath, but they've both been anointed king. Right. So it's that there's a whole process that involves anointing as well as installation. Right. And so they've both been anointed now as king, and Saul doesn't go to fight. David does go to fight. He's willing to give himself for his people. And that's how you know which is the bad king, which is the good king. Now, Saul is not a usurping king. He's a rightful king. And eventually David is adopted into his family and becomes the rightful heir because Jonathan gives up his rights to the throne. And then Jonathan dies as well. So there's not even a question. But the rightful heir to the throne and the good king are brought together and we know that because David is willing to die for the people, even when he doesn't get anything out of it. Although he that's how he ends up in Saul's family and all of that as well. But that integrated understanding of the universe and of the rulership is not something that people know or assume or believe in. So when we hear theocracy and we know that that means Jesus is ruling, we know that means more freedom. We know that means more space for life. We know that means less government coercion in our lives, right? All of that. They think that means an invisible person in the sky gets to tell us what to do. That sounds like tyranny. Now, we're already living under tyranny. That's what's we don't. I mean, you have to get a license to cut your neighbor's hair. Like we live.
You have to wear a seatbelt in your car.
Right. Yeah, that is true. It's usually smart to wear a seatbelt too.
Yeah,
but
it's smart to do a lot of things that the government hasn't yet told me to do.
Right, I know.
Right, but I get to make those decisions.
We live under a crazy amount of tyranny, but it's invisible to us because we already assume a tyrannous understanding. There's a tyrannous cosmology that we've already bought into.
But Jason,
and so a tyrant makes sense. A ruler that's not a tyrant doesn't make sense to us. It doesn't fit into this kind of world. I mean, this is why Nietzsche said all we have to do is explain. He's explicit. He said we don't have to argue against God. He said God is dead. Right? The cosmos, this cosmos has already proven to us that God is dead. All we have to do is explain psychologically where a need for God arose, and people will themselves conclude atheism. Because they've already got all the assumptions of atheism in their cosmology.
Right.
Nietzsche saw it clearly. Atheism is assumed in our cosmology. All we need to do is show them where the idea of God came from, and they will conclude atheism on their own. Freud picks that up. He writes an entire book arguing it.
Okay, hold on. Let me write this down. Okay, I want you to think about this while I'm writing this down. But okay, it's two things. Maybe there's three. How you went to seminary, right?
I went to Greyfriars.
Okay, so I know they probably dealt with stuff like this in Greyfriars, right? Like cosmology was a part of the.
It was a lot. I mean, we got a great library and we were taught how to read because that's all the time you have. Right? You got 2 years.
What else do you need?
Two years to be taught how to read. I mean, it's great theologically and pointing me to particular books and authors. Okay. But yeah,
I don't. Yeah, so, but there isn't a place that I can think of where this fits into our theological training for pastors. I don't know where this is part of. Like, you need to, like, if anything needs to be established inside of our theological foundation in our seminaries, in our churches, and in our people, is a right cosmology.
Yes.
Like you would, like we need, like that's essential to even thinking about anything on planet Earth. Is a proper cosmology.
You know what most people hear when you say cosmology? They think, wait, are you talking about putting on makeup?
No, well, maybe.
Cosmetology. That's what most people think I'm talking about when I say cosmology. Literally, it's not even a vocabulary word that people have anymore. That's how far we are. Because the word cosmology assumes that there's an integrated universe that you can study as a whole. We don't believe that anymore. And so we don't even have a word for it.
Well, when you say that, there's fragments of study as a whole that are it's almost like being blind and filling pieces out there that belong to this idea. I believe you, but I can't see what those study as a whole just is kind of out there. You know what I mean? Like whole what? You know? Right. So I guess the question is, there's two questions here. I think there's two questions. One is, how do we establish within ourselves a proper biblical cosmology? Because when you I remember this very well. I said, hey, I want to engage in metaphysics. I don't understand the conversation of metaphysics and metaphysical reality. And you gave me the set of books about the stars.
Yeah.
And I was like,
you actually read them. Most people never even read them. That's
well, I was like, hey, if I really want to know, you gave me was it Sun, Moon, Stars?
Sun, Moon, Earth. Yeah.
Sun, Moon, Earth. And
it's always the book that I push that book on everyone, and most people are like, but this doesn't affect me at all.
Yes, that's what my thought was.
Yeah.
Sun, Moon, Earth. I was like, why are we going to do astrology or something like that? Or I don't know. Like, what are we doing here? And so I read it.
Here's the thing. How did the wise men find Jesus? This is the stars, right?
But you didn't tell me that when I got the book. Like, become like a wise man, read the book, you'll be like them. Yeah, you didn't say that part. You just said, you want to know about metaphysics? Here you go. I was like, okay, this is so weird. I don't know what I'm doing. But
it's because you have to back into it because you can't see your own metaphysics. That's the difficulty.
Well, Walker Percy, then in Love in the Ruins. What book was it that you gave me?
Love in the Ruins is the novel version of Lost in the Cosmos.
Lost in the Cosmos. Yes. That's what it was. And so he takes apart, he actually tells you, he's like, all right, this is about to get crazy.
And it does.
And he's like, you don't have to read this part. You can continue reading on here's a page you can jump to, but I'm about to go through it. And he goes and tracks and goes through the stars and the way that they're designed and the way that they move and everything. And I'm like, I made it halfway through and I was like, I don't have enough of this juice up here to maintain this trajectory. So
Okay. Yeah, and there's no going back. That's the difficulty. Once you see it.
Right. Once you see it.
It's like, taking the pill and leaving the Matrix. There's no going back.
So I need to finish Lost in the Cosmos. I have the audio version of it, so I'm gonna continue going. I mean, I finished the book, but I didn't finish that part because I couldn't understand. For me, I was so disconnected from this type of cosmological argument I'll say this in a second, but that I couldn't see a way to get from where I was to what he was talking about and then connect where to go from there. Right. So right. I didn't have a bridge in my theological foundation, nor my cosmological understanding to get me to where he was. I understood that we were talking about stars. I understand we were talking about the sun and all these movements and stuff. But I wasn't able to make that jump as easily. The more and more we've been talking, there's been moments of what I have read that have come back to and say, wait a second. Everything that we talk about theologically is centered tangibly in the universe.
Right.
Right. And so now all of a sudden, with that foundation and presupposition, I am searching almost like God has put treasures out in the universe and revelation of who he is out there. I'm searching those things to say, okay, Lord, how do I marry these two? There's a marriage somewhere here that I don't, and that's been really fun to see. But how do I reestablish a biblical cosmology? And then after I do that, because I realized from you talking that we talk to the world and we talk about the world in the terms and in the way that the world talks about things. So when we even use the word theocracy, we're actually meaning exactly what it is that they're afraid of.
Right.
Yeah. Right. When we talk about, okay, I don't know how many questions I'm throwing at you. I'm throwing so many. Okay. Because I have another question about theocracy stuff, but how do I first establish a biblical cosmology? Because I feel like what that's going to do is shift my theological foundations.
It absolutely does shift your theological foundations. But I mean, if you think about it, like if you're putting a new foundation under an old house, have you ever seen, they lift the house and then they start pour new concrete, and it's amazing how many things you don't realize are out of line, right? Until you lift it up and level the house, and then so the whole house is like, you're like, why? And so the beginning of it is you have to remember to not forget the things you already know in the process, because it feels pretty revolutionary. And that's what happens to some people. They start studying it and they forget the things they already know in the process, because they feel like I've been lied to. I haven't been told the whole story, and that's true. You haven't, and it's easy to say to then turn on your old teachers, but because the beginning of it is you have to embrace a thankfulness for that it's a historical cosmology, including your own life, right? So being thankful backwards is the only way to begin this kind of process forwards, is to just say, okay, I'm not going to turn on the teachers that came before, because that's thinking in terms of the more modern, what's called an idealistic or understanding, where rather than a historical cosmology, Christianity is the way God created the world. It's a historical cosmology. So you have to begin by saying, okay, I'm right here. I'm thankful for the teachers that I've had before. I'm thankful for the institutions that I've gone through. And
Mm.
as things shift and change, they're not my rivals. I'm not going to turn on them, because that's an ahistorical and not a historical cosmology. So the beginning of it is thankfulness, right? Because things are going to creak a lot as you shift and change and move things. And then whichever resource, where you can get to everywhere from anywhere in an integrated cosmos, so you can start with anything. The place I like to begin is a book called An Offering of Uncles, because
Yeah.
it presents a positive vision, right? It's so easy. It's much easier to get traction by talking about what you don't believe, but it's harder to get distance by talking about what you don't believe, right? And An Offering of Uncles just assumes this integrated understanding of the cosmos, a poetic cohesiveness to God's creation, a poetic cohesiveness to truth, and then revels in it, enjoys it, moves forward with it. It's Capon, Robert Farrar Capon, and it's out of print. Oh, I made that book list on
Don't
Amazon.
say that on the show because everybody's gonna be like, "Ooh, is it
I just don't
available on Amazon?"
I don't know how to share it. That's the problem.
Maybe we'll figure it out. We'll put it like in the show notes or something like
Show
that. A
notes, okay.
link that you can have.
Um,
So, do you
but
think?
it's a poetic cohesiveness that you're studying.
Mm,
So the poetic cohesiveness of reality, um, the way to get there is to find people with a poetic cohesiveness and learn to see it, or learn to experience it. Right?
like Rene Girard, those guys
Yeah.
like that.
Well, so Rene Girard, he's the one who he's working backwards from the rivalry of modernity back into a cohesiveness.
Mm,
But he's the one that, for me, that opened my eyes to the foundational nature of rivalry in a non-integrated cosmos.
mm,
Right. And it explains a lot. It explains a lot about the modern world. But and then he backs in because he becomes a Christian later in life because of the God opening his eyes to the rivalry. And so he ends up backing into it. So Dante has the poetic cohesiveness, but then
yeah.
so do guys like G.K. Chesterton. And
Mm.
he's a little bit more accessible. C.S. Lewis, he's a lot more accessible because he's got his eyes open to it. Here's a
Jason, while you're looking for another, I gotta add. Oh, the camera's just following you all the way around. It's tilting sideways, and it's interesting how that's really fun. But here's one of the things. Why does it seem like the more I read, I'm finding myself reading a lot of Catholics,
yeah.
and it's troubling because I know that they have a massive problem in justification by faith alone. And yet, when it comes to certain things, it's like they've been the keepers of the books in one way or another, almost like the Jews with the scriptures.
Yeah.
It's like that they haven't lost. I mean, they've lost it in practice, but some of their teaching that they've had in the earlier time, particularly, have been elements that I don't see much inside of Protestantism anymore. Right, so they've lost the foundation of that practically in justification, but they've gotten it right in a lot of ways in some of their older writings and things that have perpetuated over time. Where, as it relates to the integrated universe, like they get that.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's I mean, I've got my guesses as to the explanation. I think what happened was, so in the high Middle Ages is when you have the beginning of the disintegration of truth, and the Protestants were the ones that held on to the medieval conceptions. I mean, there's a reason that Milton is defending it. He's a Protestant, He's defending the integrated universe over against the folks that are fighting against it. Then that defense of it moves to the intellectuals in early America, or the founding fathers. The defense of an integrated understanding of the universe. You've got some people arguing in a more revolutionary way, but France basically melts down, right? So the Roman Catholicism, the center, the heart of Roman Catholicism at that point, is in France and Italy. France melts down and literally flattens, egalitarianizes everything through blood, right? They took all of Satan's arguments for egalitarianism in Paradise Lost and said, I think we're on his side, right? And literally just killed the people that were higher above them in any sort of hierarchical system. So the French and the Italians, and then the Irish, where there was a lot of Roman Catholics, they have major societal meltdowns and lose all of it. But in America, you have people that have that integrated understanding, but it's all across the board. Protestants, you've got Roman Catholics that flee here, but the reason that they can integrate into society here is because they're the Roman Catholics that hold on to that
integrated universe,
understanding of all things. The revivalism here is what actually undoes our integrated understanding of the universe. So the revivalism individualizes, decovenantalizes our understanding of Christianity and of reality.
Kind of like Finneyism. Is that what you're thinking about?
Finneyism, yeah. And there was some of it in the First Great Awakening as well. And some of it had to do with the fact that you had these preachers coming in and people are being really moved and saved from their sins, and the churches lock their doors and say, we don't do that here, right? And so that's some of it. But you have, and even guys like Edwards, there's not a there who argues for for a revivalistic cosmology, right? In salvation, or a revivalistic historicity of an individual salvation, even though he believes in the covenant story for the church as a whole. For individuals, he's a lot more skeptical. But then the revivalism basically guts the cosmology of the American church. Revivalism doesn't touch the Roman Catholicism in America. Just revivalism doesn't hit it. And so they have a continuity with the early American thinkers that we don't have as Protestants. Because of revivalism, we threw out anything. So we'll say things like, there's no grandchildren there's no grandchildren in the church, right? Everybody's either a direct son or not at all, right? And there's a truth to that. Right? We don't depend upon the faith of previous generations. We don't merely depend upon the faith of previous generations, thinking we don't have to have our own faith. But at the same time, God says, I will be a God to you and to your children, right? So, and to your children's children, right? So there's a faith that says, well, but there are grandchildren in the faith, right? Timothy is told he's a grandchild of his grandmother, that he should be looking at the faith of his grandmother and saying, hallelujah, right? I'm a grandchild, right? So there's the continuity of generations that's expected in the integrated universe, that is considered the norm in an integrated universe. That's because of that can be embraced by faith, or it can be explained. It can. One of the reasons there's so much, there was so much racism in America was because they tried to secularize that understanding of generations through during revivalism. They wanted to hold on to the understanding of generational continuity, but they put it into blood, right? They would say good blood, bad blood. He's got good blood. He's got bad blood. And they're talking about that continuity of generations, but it's an attempt at a biological secular explanation of the continuity of generations. And it just produced all the racism. But even the understanding of races is a part of the cosmological revolution, right? It's the people that are instituting the cosmological revolution, that are developing the understanding of races, and that are saying you've got black people, red people, white people, yellow people, and that they are each different. They're each on a different continuity than from one another, right? Because of the disintegration of the human race that eventually Darwin explains through the mechanism of selection, biological selection, or survival of the fittest. Natural selection. But Linnaeus had already developed the idea. He just didn't have a mechanism to explain it. And he's the one that invented races, right? That the human race is breaking off into different branches, and those branches are rivals of one another, because you can expect that there's a fundamental rivalry, right? The different branches of humanity, which he colored, he identified by different colors, black, red, yellow, white. He said they are rivals with one another for the limited resources of the planet.
Cosmological foundation. Wow.
Because there's a fundamental cosmological rivalry. That's what you expect. And Darwin came along and said, "Oh, let me explain the mechanism by which one wins over the other." Right. But they already had made the cosmological leap.
As we're thinking about this, my head is thinking everything in nature. When we talk about a limited amount of resources, everything in nature speaks completely against that.
Right.
One seed in an apple produces multiple seeds.
Right. Yeah. One seed in an apple. One apple can produce an orchard within a couple of generations.
Right. Exactly. And everything that God has built into this world is like.
I lost you.
Like, if you work it and we have to be blind of nature not to see that. We have to come up with an excuse for why fruits and vegetables have more than one seed in them. When we get what's that purpose? What is that? It's amazing. The more I think about it, it's like there is no such thing as limited resources of something that we can't find or have more of, right? Like, God has made a world that gives us multiple resources of something. If we are faithful and believe in faith and operate in that way, he blesses it and says, here's some more, right? Like, here's more of it.
Right. I mean, this was in my Bible reading yesterday, but Proverbs 11:26. People will curse him who withholds grain, but blessing will be on the head of him who sells it. Right. It's very capitalistic, because the Bible is. But there's a withholding of God gives you a blessing that's far more than you can handle yourself, and you withhold it when you think in terms of rivalry, right? And he says there's a curse that comes with when God gives an overflowing of blessing, and you won't sell it to people, right? But because the problem is never that the world doesn't produce enough. The world produces an overwhelming amount. The problem is that the rivalry ensues and people withhold it for themselves rather than sell it, right? Because money is just a way of saying you've added value to my life, right? You give people money because they're adding value to your life, and then you get to add. So there's a blessing that comes when God fills your granary in an overflowing way, and you get to sell it to people. You get to add
You know,
value to their lives.
that's so funny. The I have been in situations where I am buying something from somebody and I just can't believe. I'm like, oh man. And they're taking my money and giving me this item and they can't believe
Right.
that this is,
Yeah.
and this transaction is us as we're leaving each other, blessing each other because you blessed me in the transaction. Oh man,
Yeah.
thank you so much. No man, thank you so much. This is no man, this is a blessing to me. You don't know how much you blessed me. Like you don't know how much you blessed me. Let me tell you. And it's
It,
this weird exchange, and it's like that should happen with almost everything that we do.
here's the thing. It is a holdover. The fact that we say thank you when we buy something, that's not that's not everywhere in the world, right? You spend time in, you know, I was in Jordan. It's a Muslim country, and there's some you meet some wonderful people, you know, Muslims that you think, you know, we'd be friends if we lived in the same town.
Yeah.
And then you go to some point where there's a financial exchange. We're just checking into our hotel. I get there and it's just a mob, right? Pushing forward. They don't line up. They don't and and they it's a push to who's to get to the front. And then when you get there, you don't say thank you after you're done with your exchange of money.
Mm.
And I thought, where does that come from? That's weird. And I think it was a Bill Bryson book that I found, the history of saying thank you in America for an exchange of goods. And it's this really interesting thing that it's a throwback to a time when we believed in an integrated universe. That's how far back it goes. And we don't realize how important that understanding is, that when you exchange goods and services for cash, everyone says thank you to everyone because we believe, because it's a symbol that the world is an overflowing place of goods and services and goodness, and that when we give money to somebody, it's a blessing, right? It's a blessing to get to give money to somebody in exchange for goods and services. But that's because that's a scriptural integrated universe understanding that just hangs around because we love those things. So, but you know, there's a lot about revivalism that shows us that it's a belief, that it's no longer a belief in an integrated universe that also hangs around. You know, liturgies used to reflect the movements of the stars and the planets, and you know, because you look in the
Wait, you can't. No. Don't. You can't be blowing my mind more than once in the show.
all right,
Don't you do
save
stuff?
that one for another
What
time.
is it? Okay, go just a
But
little bit. Just give me a little bit.
well, there,
Okay, I was like a drug addict. Okay, just a little hit.
I mean, it goes back to the Old Testament, right? There's seven lamps. You know, there's a lampstand with 7 lamps because of the 7 visible planets in the sky, right? So there's
Didn't know that part. Okay, all right.
uh and so when, because you get to Jesus and he holds the 7 um the 7 stars in his hand, in Revelation, right? This the 7 planets, because he is now, and so and this is the book of Hebrews. It says we used to, we had our cleansings in the temple and in the tabernacle are a reflection of what Moses went and saw in the heavens. And then he came back down and he built a likeness of what he saw up there. And when we see Jesus standing in the heavenly places, he's got the 7 stars in his right hand. And that was something that, it's also a reflection of the imperial claim to ultimate authority. Because you, on the coins of the time, the emperor would hold the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter in his right hand, or Jupiter and Saturn in his right hand. And so Jesus is like, well, nah, actually, I hold that, but it's in the midst of a worship service, right? You've got this worship service going on, and he's got those, and that hand, it says, then he reaches down and he touches John, right? So if you remember in Isaiah 6, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts. So I am undone. I'm a man of unclean lips. And he brings over a coal from the altar and he cleanses him. Well, John, I'm a man that's undone. He falls down and Jesus cleanses him with the sun, the moon, the stars, touches him. And, which is, and there's this symbolism is consistent throughout, because we're seated like stars in the heavenly places. We are now the lights in the heavens and all of that. But the older understanding of the liturgical movements within church were that we're supposed to reflect the love that the heavens, our love towards God, the way the heavens love God, and that is through the liturgical movements that they make throughout the year. So the consistency, the calendar, the church calendar, we establish all of that partly because we're reflecting the heavens, which reflect the heaven of heavens. Right? We worship through a church calendar, through the year, through the different liturgical phases of the year, because the heavens have phases and they're a reflection of the heaven of heavens, and it's our job to take the heaven of heavens and, I don't know, poetically imitate on the earth how it is that the created heavens worship the uncreated heavens, right?
Well, that's no different than the garden, right?
It isn't. No, it's no different than the garden. It's a reestablishment of the garden, but it's an understanding that when we sing the doxology, right? Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below.
Yeah.
Praise him above, ye heavenly hosts. Right? We're inviting the sun, the moon, and the stars to worship with us, to join us in worship. Right? What in the Old Testament, we looked at the stars, we looked at the heavens, we looked at the sun, the moon, and the stars, and they directed us into which festival we were supposed to be in. Right? God set the sun, the moon, and the stars on the fourth day as authorities and as symbols of authority, as well as calendars that set both the time, it says, and the worship services. It set the festival days. We followed them. They led us into worship, into different festivals. Every time we sing the doxology, we're showing that role has been switched. Now we lead the sun, the moon, and the stars into worship. They don't lead us into worship anymore. We set the calendar, and then we invite them to our Pentecost festival. Right? We invite them to Easter service. Right? The doxology is a cosmological revolution. Is the cosmological revolution of the resurrection, ascension of Jesus. Every time we sing it, right? It's a reminder of that. We just sing through it, and we don't even notice that we just invited the sun, the moon, and the stars and all the angels to join the congregation because they're no longer up front.
I'm on this. Yeah, okay.
The world is such a more exciting and better place than we think it is. And salvation is so much of a bigger deal than we think it is as well.
Being illiterate hurts. There are, it's starting to read and learning how to read and engaging in good literature places you. One of the things that people haven't learned about bitterness, everybody's like, I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter about it. But one of the first things that when somebody says I'm not bitter, I don't believe them, because with bitterness, you can't see it.
Right.
Your bitterness itself is something that has blinders on it. You're not allowed to see it. So you need someone or something outside of yourself to point to you so that it's like, that's it. Oh, okay. And I feel like when we have our education, we think we're smart. We got
Right.
cell phones. We have, you know, computers. You and I are talking through a device for 3 hours away, and we're talking like we're right next to each other. And so we have all this technology, and so we think that we're intelligent, but we have no concept of intelligence as it relates to the cosmos and how the world fits together and how beautiful it is. Everything out of this whole conversation, the thing that I've walked away with more than anything else is just how beautiful when the world fits together, how beautiful it really is. And we see beauty in aspects and moments, but we think it's random.
Yeah.
Even as Christians, we think it's random, which is why I think, which is why we have Christians who are afraid of the kingship of Christ.
Right.
And that's the part that I because I've tried to understand, like, why are Christians fighting against? Every time I hear a Christian, well, we don't want a theocracy, we don't want this. Like, why are you fighting against the kingship of Christ? It's not something you have an option of anyway. No more than you have the option for the sun to be in the sky, right?
Yeah.
That's where I'm learning. But the sun in the sky is not your enemy. The sun in
Right.
the sky provides light, provides nutrition and health and time and energy. It actually gives your body minerals. Like the sun in the sky is literally, when you're out there, giving your body vitamin D. That's what's going on. And in the same way, what do you think Christ would do as he is ruling? Be worse than the sun and the no. I mean, that's just how disconnected that we are from this integrated universe, that we look at the sun. It's trying to kill us. It's like it's putting minerals in your body. Right? That's what it's doing.
Right.
It's actually healing you. And you're like, oh, it's trying to kill me. And go ahead.
I mean, we live in this crazy upside down understanding of the world because we think the world is always out to get us. Right? The world is offering up a feast, day in and day out, feeding us, all of these things.
Wow.
And we're like, it's trying to kill us. Everything's always trying to eat us and kill us. And that's how we tell stories. This is why something like H.G. Wells captured the imagination of the Time Machine, captured the imagination of multiple generations, but I think is also really dangerous, right? Because it forms the now it's not dangerous when you're to people with eyes open, right? You can read H.G. Wells, you can say, oh, I get it, he's a great storyteller, but he has fully adopted the mythology of modernism. And so when he travels back in time, everything is always trying to kill you. Right, that it's all the reason that there's any safety now is because we've gathered enough power to hold back the chaos that it would otherwise be trying to consume us. You go back in time to before mankind had gathered power into national governments, and everything is always trying to kill you. Everything is trying to destroy you because chaos hasn't yet been pushed back to make room for life. And we think you can read it and say, oh yeah, that's exactly what that mythology would mean. But he has adopted a mythology, right? It's not a scientific theory that he's adopted. He's adopted a mythology and a story about the nature of things, it derived from its beginnings, right? That's what a mythology is. We as Christians haven't adopted our own mythology, our own mythos, our own story of the story that gets us the meaning of things by telling us the beginning of things, right? We have one of those, right? The scripture provides one, and we spend our time we don't spend our time adopting it as our mythos, as our mythology, right? in the beginning, everything was beautiful and wonderful and glorious, and God created a world that's a perfect fit for creatures like us. And then he said, guess what? Let's go garden the whole thing, right? He brings Adam into the garden before anything has grown up in the garden. And then before his eyes, he makes the garden grow, right? Whoosh, everything grows up. And he says, look, this is how this place works. It's wonderful. You're going to love it. It's all edible. It's going to be delicious. Go out and imitate me the way that I made this place into a garden. You go out and do that with the rest of the world. It's full to the brim with resources. Now we sinned and we brought thorns and thistles into the world, and now the world is cursed, and we have to sweat to get at those same resources. But when Jesus was going up on the cross, it was thorns and thistles that became his crown, right? He broke that curse. He took that curse onto the cross with him, and it was wrapped right around his head. So that curse of thorns and thistles has been broken. So now we're going out into the world, decursing this place and returning it to its original intent, which is the perfect kind of place to provide the sorts of things that we need to have fellowship with God and have fellowship with one another, to bless God and bless our neighbor. It's the kind of world that it is. And Jesus wrapped that curse around his head and turned it into a crown. So we can charge off into the world by faith, knowing it's still going to be difficult, but it's because God is telling the kind of story that has those difficulties in it, because that's a better story, not because he hates us now or something.
I've taken more notes in this show than I have taken in any other show that we've done. And I don't know if it's because maybe I've just had a pen in my hand and wanted to write stuff down, or if I feel like I started over in some ways.